Have you ever watched someone's heart break in public? The kind of fracture that starts silent, a hairline crack spreading through porcelain before the whole vessel shatters? Serena Brooks knew that feeling intimately. She'd lived it once before, 2 years ago, standing in a church vestibule wearing a dress that cost 3 months' wages. Now, at 29, she sat in Rosewood Cafe watching that same crack appear in her reflection on the surface of spilled hot chocolate. The cafe smelled of cinnamon and old wood, the kind of place where Portland's West Side spilled its secrets over organic fair trade coffee. Late afternoon light cut through rain-streaked windows, turning dust motes into floating embers. Serena's fingers trembled as she dabbed at the spreading brown puddle with a napkin, trying to salvage what remained of her dignity. The couple 3 tables over pretended not to stare. The barista, a kid with a man bun and concerned eyes, hovered near the espresso machine, uncertain whether intervention would help or humiliate. Her phone screen glowed with the message that had caused her to knock over the mug. "Not interested, you looked better in your photos, don't wait." No apology, no softening, just James Parker's brutal efficiency, the kind of dismissal you'd give a spam caller. Serena's throat tightened. She'd spent 40 minutes building the courage to sit here, another 20 talking herself out of leaving. Now she understood why her instincts had screamed retreat. The soaked napkin revealed something underneath, ink bleeding through the cheap paper. A note she'd written to herself this morning before doubt could poison her resolve. "You are enough. Your hands build beautiful things. Broken foundations can be rebuilt." The words blurred as chocolate seeped through the fibers, erasing her own encouragement like the universe delivering a verdict. Mrs. Opal June materialized beside the table without sound, the way she always did. 68 years had given the cafe's owner a gift for reading emotional weather systems. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, deep brown skin that held both kindness and the weight of survived storms. She carried a fresh mug and a plate of her famous heart cookies, dark chocolate with raspberry centers that bled when you bit into them. "Sometimes, dear, the latest arrival is the one who needs love the most." Her voice stayed low, meant only for Serena's ears. "And sometimes love comes wearing the most surprising disguises." Serena attempted a smile that died before reaching her eyes. Mrs. Opal had become the closest thing to a mother she'd known since moving to Portland 3 years ago, fleeing Seattle's architecture scene and the wreckage of her almost wedding. The older woman's gaze held no pity, just a peculiar blend of compassion and anticipation. Like she could see threads of fate Serena remained blind to. "It's fine." The words came out smaller than intended, contradicted by everything in Serena's posture, the way her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to disappear into herself. "This is what happens when girls like me try to be brave." She reached for her purse and her sleeve rode up, exposing the small tattoo on her inner wrist. Broken chains transforming into butterflies, each link fragmenting into delicate wings. She'd gotten it inked the day after standing alone in that church, reading Dylan Foster's note for the 100th time. "You're not enough for someone like me. I need a partner who matches my ambition, my vision. Find your own level, Serena. This was a mistake." 24 hours later, she'd walked into a tattoo parlor in Capitol Hill and emerged with permanent proof that fractures could become flight. Mrs. Opal said nothing about the tattoo, though her eyes tracked to it with recognition. She squeezed Serena's shoulder once, then moved away toward the kitchen. At the doorway, she paused, watching as Serena pulled out a leather-bound sketchbook from her bag. The pages fell open to reveal designs that blurred the boundary between pastry and structural engineering. Gingerbread houses with flying buttresses and load-bearing calculations in the margins. Cookie bridges with tension equations mapped alongside frosting patterns. Heart-shaped tarts with golden ratios plotted out in precise measurements. Beauty married to mathematics. "You know, Mrs. Opal called softly across the cafe's ambient noise. Even the most inspirational cathedrals began as simple sketches in someone's mind. Your hands were meant to build more than just pastries, child. Serena snapped the book shut, heat flooding her cheeks. No one was supposed to know about the architecture degree she'd abandoned, the dreams she'd packed away like winter clothes when Dylan convinced her that her vision wasn't worth pursuing, that her talent was derivative at best, dangerous at worst. After he'd stood before a room of 200 architects at the Pacific Design Conference and accused her of plagiarism, of stealing his concepts and trying to pass them off as her own, the university's dean had suggested she withdraw quietly to avoid formal proceedings. Never mind that she'd created those designs months before Dylan. Never mind that his supposed proof consisted of sketches that looked suspiciously like photographs of her work with timestamps mysteriously altered. The optics were all that mattered, and Dylan Foster, heir to Foster and Associates Architecture, had better optics than a Filipino white girl from Tacoma with student loans and second-hand drafting tools. The bell above the door jangled with unexpected force, yanking Serena from the spiral of memory. Two identical little girls burst into the cafe like twin hurricanes, pink jackets askew, cheeks flushed from running. Their matching auburn hair had been woven into intricate cornrows, beads clicking subtly as they whipped their heads around, scanning the space with an intensity unusual for children who couldn't be older than 6. Something about their urgency made the whole cafe pause mid-motion, conversations dying as patrons sensed they'd become audience to something extraordinary. "Are you Miss Serena?" The one with the unicorn hair clip spoke first, breathing hard, small chest heaving under her jacket. Serena froze, purse half closed in her lap. "Yes?" The cafe fell into complete silence. Even the espresso machine seemed to hold its breath. The second twin stepped forward, hands clasped as if in prayer, her voice carrying a gravity that filled the room despite its childlike pitch. "We're Amara and Zara Caldwell. Our daddy is Darius Caldwell." She took a breath so deep it lifted her small shoulders. "He's your date." Serena blinked. "Your daddy?" The first twin, the one who'd asked if she was Miss Serena, nodded with such earnest conviction it would have been funny under different circumstances. Then she leaned close, her whisper somehow audible to everyone in the hushed space. "He told his assistant you seem nice, but he doesn't know we're here. We might be in trouble when he finds out." The second twin's eyes, startlingly wise for someone so young, locked onto Serena's. "He's stuck fixing a building that's falling apart, the one by the river. But we didn't want you to think he forgot about you." She reached out and took Serena's hand, with a solemnity that felt like a vow. "He would never forget someone like you on purpose. Daddy doesn't forget things unless he's really, really sad." Mrs. Opal's soft chuckle broke through the tension. Her eyes gleamed with something that looked suspiciously like the beginning of tears, or perhaps recognition of forces larger than any of them. "Well now," her voice carried across the cafe like a benediction. "Seems life has decided you deserve a better story than being stood up, Serena." She glanced at the twins with undisguised delight. Sometimes the universe sends exactly what we need, even if it comes in packages small enough to need booster seats. What would you do if two little matchmakers showed up claiming to be sent by destiny? And who was Darius Caldwell, a man whose daughters would risk his anger to make sure a stranger didn't feel forgotten? "Our daddy is a very important architect." The twin who'd introduced them as Amara climbed onto the chair opposite Serena without invitation, her sister Zara quickly following. Both girls positioned themselves at eye level with the bewildered baker, their expressions a mixture of hope and determination. "He builds things that don't fall down, except today something is falling down and he has to fix it right now." Serena's shock began giving way to reluctant curiosity. There was something disarming about these children, The matter-of-fact way they explained the world, like adults were simply taller people who'd forgotten how simple truth could be. "How did you know where to find me?" The question came out softer than she intended. The twins exchanged a look that suggested they'd perfected the art of gentle mischief, the kind that came from good hearts rather than malice. "We saw your picture on Daddy's phone." Amara admitted this like confessing to eating an extra cookie, guilty but unrepentant. "And Mrs. Monroe, that's his assistant," Zara clarified with the precision of someone used to providing important details. "She said Daddy was supposed to meet a lady named Serena at Rosewood Cafe at 6 o'clock. But he forgot." Amara's face turned suddenly serious, a shadow crossing features too young to carry such weight. "Not because he wanted to. He forgets everything except work since Mommy went to heaven." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward through the cafe's atmosphere. Serena felt her throat constrict. Mrs. Opal, who'd been wiping down a nearby table while obviously listening, moved closer, setting down fresh cups of hot chocolate for the twins without being asked. "Your mommy went to heaven?" Serena's voice came out barely above a whisper. Zara nodded, small hands wrapping around the warm mug as if drawing comfort from its heat. 20 months ago, she was driving home from a meeting about a building project, and there was a big truck that couldn't stop in the rain. The little girl stared into her cocoa like she might find different answers there. "It happened really fast. They said she didn't feel anything." Amara's voice dropped even lower. Daddy was supposed to be on that site visit with her, but he stayed home because Zara had a fever. Now he doesn't like to talk about it very much. He thinks we don't know he cries, but we hear him sometimes in his office at night. The cafe grew quieter still, as if the universe itself acknowledged what these children carried. Serena felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the wall she'd built around her heart these past 2 years. Mrs. Opal placed fresh cocoa in front of Serena, her eyes saying volumes without words. "Listen to them, child. They came to you for a reason. We have her picture." Zara reached into a pink backpack covered in glitter stars, pulling out a worn photograph she handled with the reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. In the photo, a beautiful woman with the twins' auburn hair smiled widely, arms around both girls who looked about 4. Behind them stood a man, tall with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. One arm around his family, the other holding what looked like architectural plans. He was striking, dark-skinned with broad shoulders that seemed built to carry responsibilities most people would buckle under, dressed in casual clothes that couldn't hide his natural command of space. "That's our daddy." Amara's finger traced the man's outline with obvious love. "Darius Caldwell. He builds things for everyone else, libraries and schools and places where people feel safe, but he doesn't know how to fix what's broken inside us." A memory flashed unbidden through Serena's mind. Herself standing alone in a church vestibule, white dress suddenly feeling like a straitjacket, reading Dylan's note for the first time while guests whispered behind closed doors. She blinked the image away, but not before Amara's perceptive eyes caught the shadow crossing her face. "Miss Serena." Zara's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow held wisdom beyond her 6 years. "You look like someone who knows about broken things that need fixing." The observation struck Serena with unexpected force, cutting through defenses she didn't know she'd raised. "What makes you say that?" Amara pointed to the sketchbook still sitting on the table. "You draw things that hold other things together. Bridges and houses and hearts made of cookies. We saw when you opened your book. And you have sad eyes too." Zara added this with the blunt honesty only children possess. "Like Daddy's eyes when he thinks we're not looking. But you still make pretty things even when you're sad. That's brave. Would you believe that sometimes the most perceptive eyes are the ones that haven't learned to look away from pain?" That a connection could begin with such brutal honesty, stripped of adult pretense? We have a plan. Amara announced this suddenly, her small face lighting up with determination that would have been amusing if it wasn't so fierce. A very good plan that we made all by ourselves. A very, very good plan. Zara confirmed with a solemn nod. Daddy hasn't had dinner yet because he never eats when he's fixing problems. And when he doesn't eat, he gets grumpy and makes mistakes and then stays up all night fixing the mistakes. Very grumpy, Amara agreed, nodding with the certainty of someone who'd observed this pattern many times. And he's been at the library since this morning, which means he probably only had coffee and maybe a granola bar if Mrs. Monroe made him. Serena glanced at the antique clock on the cafe wall. 7:15. So your plan is for me to bring him dinner? The twins beamed in unison, their synchronized joy almost blinding in its purity. Yes, but we have to hurry because the building might actually fall down if he doesn't fix it soon. Zara delivered this with the casual tone of someone discussing weather, not structural catastrophe. I can't just show up at his workplace. Serena's shyness flared hot in her chest, the old familiar fear of being where she didn't belong, of presuming she had value someone might want. That would be weird, and he doesn't even know me, and I'm not qualified to be around construction sites. That would be perfect, Amara interrupted, bouncing slightly in her seat. He's at the Riverside Community Library project right by the water. The foundation has cracks and the city people are mad because it might not open on time, like Daddy's heart. Zara whispered this more to herself than anyone else, but in the cafe's silence it carried. The foundation has cracks too. Mommy used to fix them, but now nobody does. Mrs. Opal, who'd been listening while pretending not to, stepped forward with decisive energy. The girls are right, Serena. No one should work through dinner, and the Lord knows I have plenty of food that would otherwise go to waste. She was already moving toward the kitchen before Serena could protest. Besides, what kind of Christian would I be if I let a hard-working man go hungry when I have the means to help? Serena hesitated, torn between retreating to the safety of her apartment and a strange tugging in her chest, a feeling she hadn't experienced in 2 years. Something about these girls and their mission sparked courage she'd thought had died in that church vestibule. They saw something in her that she'd forgotten existed, something worth defending, worth acting on. I don't know, she began, but Zara pulled something else from her backpack before she could finish. A small framed photo of just their mother, her smile radiant even through the protective glass. The woman's eyes held intelligence and warmth in equal measure, the kind of person who probably made everyone around her feel seen. Mommy always said we should help people who forget to take care of themselves. Zara's voice was soft but sure, carrying conviction that children only possess when repeating words that shape them. She said being kind is never wrong, even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary. And Daddy forgets to take care of himself all the time now, Amara added. He takes care of us and the buildings and everyone who works for him, but he forgets about himself. Mommy wouldn't like that. The simple wisdom silenced any further objections. Mrs. Opal packed a large wicker basket with sandwiches still warm from the oven, thermos of soup that smelled of rosemary and comfort, and a box of her famous heart cookies, the ones with centers that bled raspberry when you bit into them, sweet and tart and complex all at once. If you bring warmth to someone who's forgotten it exists, the older woman said with knowing eyes that had witnessed too many broken things not to believe in repair, you might just heal more than you think. Sometimes we don't know we're medicine until we show up where we're needed. 20 minutes later, Serena found herself driving her aging Honda Civic toward the Riverside construction site, 2 excited twins buckled in the back seat. This is madness, she thought, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. She was driving two children she'd met 30 minutes ago to deliver dinner to a man she'd never met, who technically hadn't stood her up because he'd never agreed to meet her in the first place. The whole situation violated every safety protocol she'd learned about stranger danger. Yet somehow it felt more right than anything she'd done in months. As Amara and Zara chattered in the back about their daddy's buildings and how one time he designed a school that looked like it was smiling and another time he made a hospital where all the windows faced the sun so sick people could feel warmth. Serena caught glimpses of herself in the rearview mirror. There was a light in her eyes that had been absent for so long she'd forgotten what hope looked like on her own face. Maybe second chances don't always knock on doors, she thought. Maybe sometimes they're 6 years old and wear pink jackets and see things adults have trained themselves not to notice. "Turn here," Amara called out, pointing toward the river. "You can see the construction lights. They're really bright because Daddy says you can't fix problems in the dark." Bright construction lights illuminated the skeleton of what would become a grand library, glass and steel and sweeping lines that seemed to embrace the riverside rather than dominate it. Even unfinished, the structure took Serena's breath away. The architecture student in her, the part she'd tried to bury under flour and sugar and the safety of other people's recipes, stirred to life. This wasn't just functional design. This was vision married to purpose, beauty serving something larger than ego. "Did your daddy design that?" She couldn't hide her awe, didn't try to. Zara nodded with obvious pride. "He says libraries are the most important buildings because they hold all the stories people need to heal themselves. And they're free, so anyone can come and find the story they need, not just people with money." Serena parked in a visitor spot, suddenly nervous in a way that had nothing to do with showing up uninvited. This felt significant somehow, like she was crossing a threshold she couldn't uncross. Maybe this isn't such a good idea. Her old fears surfaced, whispering that she didn't belong in places where real architects worked, that she was just a baker with delusions, that Dylan had been right about her knowing her level. "Too late," Amara announced, already unbuckling her seatbelt with practiced efficiency. "We're here now and Daddy needs to eat and you brought food so we have to go." As they approached the site, Serena spotted a tall figure standing near the foundation excavation, gesturing to a cluster of workers in hard hats and high-visibility vests. Even from a distance, she recognized him from the photo. Darius Caldwell, though his shoulders carried more tension than they had in that family portrait. His stance more rigid, like he'd forgotten how to relax. A woman in a sleek business suit stood beside him, tablet in hand, leaning slightly into his personal space with the familiarity of someone who believed she belonged there. She was striking in that calculated way, tall and polished with the kind of confidence that came from old money and excellent posture training. Her platinum hair was pulled back in a severe bun that somehow looked elegant rather than harsh, and her tailored navy dress probably cost more than Serena made in a month. "That's Miss Vanessa," Zara whispered, her usual enthusiasm dimming. "She wants to be our new mommy because she has a lot of money and she's on the board of directors or something important like that." "But we don't want her," Amara added firmly. She smiles with her mouth but not her eyes. "And she told Daddy that Mommy would want him to move on. But Mommy never even met her, so how would she know what Mommy wanted?" Before Serena could process this information or suggest maybe they should turn around and forget this whole thing, the twins broke away, running toward their father with the abandon only children possess, the kind of trust that adults lose somewhere along the way. "Daddy! Daddy!" Their voices carried across the construction site, turning heads. Darius Caldwell turned, his expression transforming from concentrated focus to pure shock as he spotted his daughters sprinting toward him across uneven ground. Then his gaze lifted, landing on Serena standing uncertainly behind them with a wicker basket, and shock gave way to confusion that would have been comical if her heart wasn't trying to climb out of her throat. "Amara! Zara!" He knelt as the twins crashed into his arms, their excited voices overlapping into incomprehensible noise. "What on earth are you doing here? Where's Mrs. Wilson?" His eyes found Serena again, searching for answers she didn't have. "We brought your date because you forgot." Amara announced this with the pride of someone who'd solved a complex problem. "And she made dinner so you wouldn't be grumpy and mess up the library." "I'm so sorry," Serena called out, heat rising to her cheeks under the stares of construction workers and this man, and especially the woman in the navy dress whose expression had cooled several degrees. "They came to the cafe and said you were working late, and Mrs. June thought you might need food, and I didn't realize this was... they said you were." She trailed off, drowning in her own awkwardness. Vanessa stepped forward, eyebrows arched in calculated disdain. "You let your children roam around Portland with strangers now, Darius?" Her voice carried that particular sharpness that wealthy people deploy like weapons. Concern as criticism. "That seems remarkably irresponsible even for you." The twins frowned in unison. "She's not a stranger," Amara protested with the indignation of someone whose logic was unassailable. "She's Miss Serena, Daddy's date that he forgot about because he forgets everything except buildings, and she makes the best cookies in all of Portland." Zara added helpfully. "Mrs. Opal said so, and Mrs. Opal knows everyone's cookies." Serena felt the weight of every stare, wanted to sink through the concrete and disappear into whatever foundation they were supposedly fixing. This was a mistake. She set the basket down on a nearby equipment crate. "I'll just go. I'm sorry for the confusion." "No." Darius's voice stopped her mid-turn, and something in his tone, a warmth that seemed to surprise even him, made her pause. "Please stay. You brought food, and I definitely owe you an explanation at minimum." His eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and Serena saw the exhaustion there, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe, or recognition, like he was seeing something he'd forgotten existed. Sometimes the most terrifying moments are doorways to everything we've secretly wished for. The question is whether we have the courage to step through instead of running away. Darius ran a hand through his close-cropped hair, a gesture that seemed habitual when he was searching for words. "I completely forgot about our meeting." The admission came with obvious discomfort. "Sandra from the community center set it up last week, something about catering options for the library's opening reception." He paused, understanding dawning across his features. Wait, this wasn't supposed to be a date. Serena felt her mortification reach new heights. The twins had misunderstood. Of course they had, because why would someone like Darius Caldwell actually want to meet her for any reason other than business? "Girls." Darius's voice was firm but gentle, the tone of a father who loved deeply but needed to establish boundaries. "You can't just leave the house without telling Mrs. Wilson. And you definitely can't go around telling people I'm on dates with them." "But Daddy..." Amara's lower lip trembled, her small chin lifting with defiance born of desperate hope. "We heard you tell Mrs. Monroe that Miss Serena seemed nice when you saw her picture on the dating app thingy." Zara finished her sister's thought the way twins do, seamless handoff of words. "And you said maybe you'd message her, but you were too busy and then you forgot. So we helped. We sent the message and set up the meeting and everything." Darius's cheeks darkened with embarrassment, and Serena saw a crack in his composed exterior. Vanessa's expression had cooled from calculated disdain to something approaching Arctic fury, though she masked it quickly behind professional concern. "I think I'll let you handle your family matters, Darius." Vanessa's voice was crisp, clipped. "We can discuss the foundation issues and the revised timeline tomorrow morning." With a pointed glance at Serena that managed to convey entire paragraphs of dismissal, she added, "Some problems require professional solutions after all. Technical expertise, not well-meaning amateurs." As Vanessa clicked away on expensive heels that seemed impractical for a construction site, Darius sighed, the sound carrying 20 months of exhaustion. Then he offered Serena an apologetic smile that transformed his face, made him look younger and more approachable. I am genuinely sorry about all of this. For missing our meeting, which apparently was set up by my meddling but well-intentioned daughters, and for dragging you out here under false pretenses. It's okay, Serena replied, surprised to find she actually meant it. They were worried about you. That's sweet, even if the execution was unconventional. Darius glanced at his watch, then at the food basket, and Serena watched a small war play out behind his eyes. Duty versus basic human needs. The work that never ended versus the unexpected gift of connection that his daughters had somehow engineered. Would you mind if we had that meeting now? He gestured toward a makeshift table covered with architectural drawings, weighted down against the evening breeze with various tools and a coffee mug that looked like it had been empty for hours. Just delayed by a few hours and under slightly different circumstances? I could actually use a break, and the girls are already here, so Mrs. Wilson is probably frantic. I texted her. Amara produced a small phone from her jacket pocket with the triumphant air of someone who'd thought of everything. I said we were with Daddy at his work, so she wouldn't worry. Darius raised an eyebrow. Not quite the whole truth, but we'll discuss that later when we're home. He turned back to Serena, and she saw hope in his expression, fragile and uncertain. So what do you say, dinner meeting? Serena nodded, fighting the smile that wanted to break across her face. Dinner meeting? Sure. They settled at the makeshift table while Amara and Zara perched on upturned buckets nearby, swinging their legs and watching the adults with barely contained glee. The construction lights cast everything in harsh illumination that should have been unflattering but somehow felt magical, like they'd created their own world separate from the city humming beyond the fence. These are incredible, Darius said after biting into one of Mrs. Opal's heart cookies. And something in his expression made Serena think he hadn't truly tasted anything in a long time. The way you truly taste things when you're present, when you're not just consuming fuel to continue existing. What's in these? Love and butter and the secret ingredient Mrs. Opal won't tell anyone. Serena's voice was quiet. She says some recipes are meant to be felt, not replicated. Sounds like architecture. Darius studied her with new attention. The best buildings have something you can't quite quantify. Something that goes beyond materials and engineering. Thank you. She accepted the compliment with a small nod. Baking helps me think. It's meditative, the precision of it, getting the ratios exactly right so everything holds together. What do you think about while you're baking? The question seemed genuinely curious, not just polite conversation. Structures. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. Balance and tension and what holds things together when forces try to pull them apart. How you distribute weight so nothing collapses. Darius studied her with eyes that suddenly saw more than she'd intended to reveal. That sounds more like architecture than baking. Like you understand load-bearing principles and structural integrity. Heat crept up Serena's neck. I studied it for 2 years before I stopped. The words came reluctantly, old wounds opening, changed directions. Why did you stop? He asked this gently, but the question still landed like a fist in her stomach. Someone convinced me I wasn't good enough. She finally said, staring at her hands, and I believed him. Darius was silent for a long moment, and Serena braced for pity or the awkward subject change people usually deployed when conversations got uncomfortable. Instead, he spread out one of the architectural drawings, securing the corners against the breeze. What do you think of this? The community cafe section of the library? Something's not working and I can't see it. Fresh eyes might help. Serena hesitated, old fear warring with the part of her that had never stopped loving design. Then curiosity won. She leaned forward, fingers tracing the lines of the blueprint. Her mind engaged automatically, seeing patterns and flows that 2 years of forced dormancy hadn't erased. The circulation is interrupted here. She pointed to where the cafe space connected to the main reading area. People want to move naturally from books to food, from feeding their minds to feeding their bodies. But this wall creates a psychological barrier. It divides when it should invite. You're thinking about structural support, which makes sense, but what if you used columns instead? Create a visual connection while maintaining the load distribution. Darius stared at her, then back at the drawing, then at her again. His expression shifted through surprise to something like wonder. You're absolutely right. I've been staring at this for 2 weeks and completely missed it. We don't need a wall there. We need transparency with strategic support. He shook his head and a smile formed, genuine and unguarded in a way that made Serena's chest tighten. You have a real gift for this. Whoever told you otherwise was either blind or threatened by your talent. She draws buildings made of cookies. Zara piped up from her bucket perch, unable to contain herself any longer. Really good ones with math and everything. We saw them in her special book. Darius's eyes found Serena's again, and something new kindled there. Something that felt like possibility. Maybe we could collaborate on the cafe design. I could actually use someone who thinks about space the way you do, who understands that buildings are meant to serve human needs, not just engineers' egos. The offer hung in the air between them, and Serena understood it was more than professional. It was a bridge being extended, an invitation to step back into the world she'd been exiled from, but on different terms. Terms she might be able to accept. Darius leaned closer, his voice dropping, though only the twins were near enough to hear. My wife before the accident. He paused, the words still difficult even 20 months later. She used to say that the foundation of love is trust, and we should never stop building. She believed in continuous creation, that standing still was the same as crumbling. His voice caught slightly. But I did stop after she died, stopped building anything new. I maintained what already existed, took care of the girls and the firm and the projects already in motion. But I didn't start anything that mattered, didn't lay a single new brick in my own foundation. Then you and I are the same, Serena replied, her own voice trembling with recognition. Both stopped building, both maintaining ruins and calling it safety. Their eyes met in understanding that went deeper than the words, and to their surprise they laughed. Not the polite chuckle of acquaintances, but real laughter, soft and bittersweet and carrying relief. They were two people standing amid the rubble of their past lives, recognizing themselves in each other's wreckage and finding it less lonely than solitary grief. From several yards away, partially hidden behind a concrete support column, Vanessa Sterling watched with a face hardening into something cold and calculating. She'd heard Darius call Serena the calm in the chaos of this project. Watched him smile in a way he hadn't smiled in 20 months of her careful positioning, her strategic patience. She clutched her tablet tighter, fingers white against the metal case, and an idea began forming. When hearts began to thaw, they became vulnerable again. In that vulnerability lay both great risk and the only chance for healing. But also, Vanessa thought with grim determination, the perfect opportunity for those who knew how to exploit fractures before they fully mended. The next morning, Serena stood in Mrs. Opal's cramped office behind the cafe kitchen, staring at a tablet screen that showed her professional execution. The older woman's face carried gravity Serena had only seen once before, the day she'd hired her 3 years ago and listened to the whole messy story of Seattle and Dylan and the wedding that wasn't. I'm sorry, child. Mrs. Opal's voice was gentle, but her eyes blazed with anger at forces beyond their control. Someone posted this on the Portland Architecture Forum last night. It went up around 2 in the morning. There on the screen, a photo of Serena and Darius at the construction site. heads bent together over blueprints, the construction lights creating an intimate glow around them. The caption read, CEO Darius Caldwell dating unqualified bakery worker. Unprofessional conflict of interest raises questions about Riverside Library project integrity. Sources cite prior plagiarism allegations. Public funds at risk. Serena's stomach dropped through the floor. This isn't... We weren't. The words stuck in her throat. We were just talking about cafe design. He asked my opinion. That's all. Mrs. Opal squeezed her shoulder. I know that, and the good Lord knows that. But Walter Bloomfield saw it this morning over his breakfast. And you know how that man is about appearances and his precious investments. Walter Bloomfield owned Bloomfield Development Corporation, which owned half the commercial real estate in downtown Portland, including the building that housed Rosewood Cafe. He also sat on the Riverside Library Project's investment board, having committed $8 million in private funding to supplement the city's budget. A man who built his fortune on avoiding even the whiff of impropriety. He called me at 6:30. Mrs. Opal continued, each word clearly costing her. Said the cafe can't have this kind of association with the library project. Says it looks like we're trying to gain unfair influence or insider information, like we're part of some scheme. So I'm fired. Serena heard herself say it from a distance. The familiar sensation of having ground yanked from beneath her feet returning with sickening clarity, just like before, just like Seattle. Mrs. Opal's eyes flashed. It's temporary, you hear me? Just until this blows over. And I'll pay you regardless because this isn't right and it isn't fair, and I won't have you suffering for kindness. But he owns the building and he can make things very difficult if I don't cooperate. I'm sorry, baby, I'm so sorry. But Serena was already untying her apron, her walls rebuilding around her heart with the speed of long practice. Brick by brick, cement setting faster than it should, sealing her back inside the fortress she'd thought was maybe possibly beginning to crumble. It's fine. The words came out flat, emotionless, the voice of someone who'd learned that feeling only made things hurt more. I should have known better than to step outside my world even for one night. Should have stayed in my lane like Dylan always said. She packed her few belongings from the tiny locker in the back, fingers trembling as she moved. Her collection of recipe cards, the spare shoes she kept for double shifts. The framed photo of her and Mrs. Opal from last Christmas when they'd stayed late making cookies for the homeless shelter. She left a small box on the counter, her last batch of heart cookies still warm from this morning's early bake, with a handwritten note in careful script. Even broken things can hold sweetness. Thank you for everything. Tears blurred her vision as she walked out through the cafe's back entrance, not seeing Darius Caldwell himself approaching from the opposite direction, a folder of revised blueprints in his hand, and hope in his stride. By the time he entered through the front door, Serena was 3 blocks away, crying in her parked car, gripping the steering wheel like it might anchor her to something solid. Where is she? Darius's voice carried more emotion than he usually allowed in public. Mrs. Opal studied him carefully from behind the counter, this tall black man in an expensive suit who somehow looked smaller than his frame, diminished by whatever weight he carried. She left. Someone made sure she'd have to. The older woman showed him the forum post on her tablet, watching understanding and fury dawn across his features in waves. Vanessa. He said it flatly, not a question but a confirmed suspicion. This has her fingerprints all over it. The photography angle, the timing, the specific language about conflicts of interest. She sits on 3 boards with Bloomfield. Well, whoever it was cost Serena her job. Mrs. Opal's voice carried steel beneath the gentleness, and probably more than that. That girl's been hurt before, Mr. Caldwell. Badly, publicly, cruelly. What do you mean? Darius set down his folder, giving her his full attention. Mrs. Opal sighed, making a decision about what loyalty demanded and what healing required. That girl was left at the altar 2 years ago by a man named Dylan Foster. Not privately, not quietly, very publicly at a church in Seattle with 200 guests already seated. He left her a note saying she wasn't enough for someone of his caliber, that she needed to find her own level in life. She paused, letting the cruelty of it land. But that wasn't even the worst part. 6 months before that, he'd accused her publicly of plagiarizing his work at some big architecture conference. Destroyed her reputation before she even had one. Made sure no one in that world would take her seriously. She had to drop out of school, leave Seattle, start over doing something safe where no one could hurt her that way again. Darius stood very still, absorbing this. Last night was the first time I've seen her truly connect with anyone in 2 years. First time she talked about architecture without flinching. First time she smiled like she remembered how. And now someone's yanked that away from her again. Mrs. Opal's eyes bored into his. So what are you going to do about it, Mr. Caldwell? Because that girl's been running for 2 years and she's gotten real good at it. If you want to catch her, you better have something more substantial than good intentions. Do you have her address? His jaw was set in a way that suggested immovable decisions forming. Mrs. Opal shook her head. I can't give that out, privacy laws and all. But I can give her a message if you've got one. Darius nodded slowly. Tell her I understand foundations, not just in buildings but in people. I understand how they crack and how they can be repaired if someone's willing to do the work. And tell her the library opens in 2 weeks regardless of what Bloomfield or anyone else threatens. I hope she'll be there because her vision's in that building now, whether she knows it or not. As he turned to leave, Mrs. Opal called after him. You lost someone too, didn't you? Darius stopped, hand on the door. My wife, 20 months ago. Car accident in the rain. Isabella. And you've been living just for those girls since then. He turned slightly, not quite looking back. They're all I have left of her. All I let myself have. Mrs. Opal's voice softened but didn't weaken. No, Mr. Caldwell. They're all you've allowed yourself to have. There's a difference between honoring memory and building a shrine. Your wife would know which one you're doing. Darius left without responding. His usual measured stride different, less certain, like the ground beneath him had shifted in ways he couldn't quite compensate for. The morning sun cut harsh shadows across the Portland streets, making everything look stark and unforgiving. Back at the Caldwell architecture offices downtown, a converted warehouse in the Pearl District with exposed brick and soaring ceilings, he went straight to his corner office overlooking the Willamette River. The space was immaculate in that way that suggested professional cleaners, rather than lived-in comfort. Architectural models lined shelves, awards gathered dust in a display case he never looked at, and on his desk, a single framed photo of Isabella with Amara and Zara at the beach. All 3 of them laughing at something outside the frame. He pulled up his laptop and within 15 minutes had confirmed what he already knew. The forum post originated from an IP address registered to Sterling Consulting Group, Vanessa's family firm. She hadn't even bothered to hide it particularly well, probably assuming he wouldn't look or wouldn't care enough to trace it. He called her into his office at 10:30. She arrived perfectly composed in a charcoal Armani suit, platinum hair immaculate, carrying her ever-present tablet like a shield. I've worked with you for 4 years. Darius's voice was cold in a way she'd never heard, devoid of the collegial warmth he usually maintained even in disagreements. I trusted you with this company's reputation, with projects that matter to communities. But never again with my personal life or my daughter's. Vanessa's composure cracked slightly. Darius, I have no idea what you're talking about. He turned his laptop screen toward her, showing the forum post with its metadata and IP tracking. Don't insult both of us by pretending. You posted this at 2:13 this morning from your office computer. You contacted Walter Bloomfield directly. You've been positioning yourself for 20 months thinking I was too grief-stricken to notice, and the moment someone else showed up, you went nuclear. Vanessa's mask slipped entirely, revealing something ugly underneath. She's just a baker, Darius, a shy girl who makes cookies and has delusions about being an architect. She has no place in your world, no place in those girls' lives. You need someone who understands what it means to operate at your level. That's where you're wrong. He handed her a folder, his movements precise and final. She has the one thing this company has been missing since Isabella died. Heart, vision that serves people instead of egos, the ability to see what matters instead of what impresses. The folder contained transfer papers. Your reassignment to our Seattle branch is effective immediately. You'll report to Greg Morrison and have no contact with Portland projects or clients. Your board positions will be reassigned. If you contest this, I'll make the forum post and your involvement very public, and your family's reputation will suffer accordingly. Vanessa stared at him, then at the papers, and something desperate flashed across her face. I loved you. I've loved you since before Isabella died. I waited. I was patient. I supported you and those girls and this company. You loved the idea of what I represented. Darius's voice didn't soften. Status and success and the perfect family to complete your perfect life. But you never knew me, never knew what I actually need. And anyone who would deliberately hurt an innocent person to eliminate competition isn't someone I can trust in any capacity. After she left, slamming the door with uncharacteristic loss of control, Darius sat alone in his office staring at the blueprints for the library cafe. Serena's suggested changes were marked in red, her handwriting small and precise. He'd incorporated every one of them, and the space had transformed from functional to inspired, from adequate to healing. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to the photos Amara had somehow synced from his dating app before he deleted it in frustration 3 weeks ago. Serena's profile showed her in the cafe, flour dusting her cheek mid-laugh at something off-camera. Her bio was short: baker by necessity, architect at heart, looking for someone who understands that broken things can still be beautiful. He'd swiped right immediately, then gotten pulled into the foundation crisis and forgotten to message her. His daughters had filled that gap with 6-year-old logic and innocent scheming, and now he was sitting with the wreckage of their matchmaking attempt scattered around him like debris from a controlled demolition. His late wife's words echoed from memory, something she'd said 3 years ago after they'd lost a major project to a competitor. The foundation of love is trust, Marcus. Don't ever stop building just because something collapsed. You rebuild stronger, with better materials, deeper footings. He'd stopped building the moment the hospital called about the accident, stopped planning anything beyond the immediate requirements of fatherhood and firm leadership, maintained existing structures but laid no new foundation. Until a shy baker with sad eyes and an instinctive understanding of how things should hold together had walked onto his construction site carrying dinner and unexpected hope. Picking up his office phone, he called the library board chairman. About the opening ceremony in 2 weeks. I'd like to make some changes to the program and I need your help with something. 5 days passed. Serena ignored the messages Mrs. Opal relayed. The texts from unknown numbers that she suspected were Darius, the voicemails from Amara and Zara that she couldn't bring herself to delete but couldn't bear to answer. She stayed in her studio apartment in southeast Portland, alternating between anger at herself for hoping and grief for what might have been. The apartment was small but hers, a 1-bedroom 3rd-floor walk-up with slanted ceilings and a fire escape that looked toward Mount Hood on clear days. She'd painted the walls a warm cream and filled the space with second-hand furniture made cozy through blankets and pillows. Her sketchbooks lined a shelf above a tiny desk, years of designs she'd never shown anyone, buildings and bridges and spaces meant to heal rather than impress. On the third day, she pulled them down and spread them across her bed and floor, really looking at her own work for the first time in 2 years. There was talent here. She could see it now with some distance. Not derivative, not plagiarized, but genuinely original thinking about how spaces could serve emotional needs alongside functional ones. A children's hospital designed around the idea of adventure rather than illness. A homeless shelter that preserved dignity through thoughtful circulation and private spaces. A community center that felt like a home. Dylan had been wrong, or more accurately, Dylan had been threatened. She understood that now, in a way she couldn't before, could see how he'd systematically undermined her confidence because her instincts were better than his technical precision. How he'd needed her small so he could feel large. On the fifth day, she started sketching again. Not bakery designs or cookie architecture, but real buildings for real needs. Her hands remembered the movements, the way pencil strokes could suggest weight and lightness, how shadows indicated depth and invitation. She worked through the night, filling pages with variations on the library cafe, expanding Darius's vision into something that could actually change how people experienced public spaces. When she finally fell asleep at dawn, her dreams were full of structures that held without crushing, spaces that protected without confining. On the sixth day, an official invitation arrived by courier. Heavy cardstock, professionally printed, Riverside Community Library grand opening ceremony, special recognition of community contributors. Attached was a note in Mrs. Opal's unmistakable handwriting. He asked me to send this personally. Go, child. Some foundations deserve a second chance. Some people are worth the risk of believing again. Serena held the invitation for a long time, tracing the embossed letters with her fingertip. Part of her wanted to throw it away, to maintain the safety of isolation. But another part, the part that had spent 6 nights sketching buildings she'd never build, whispered that perhaps running had its own cost. Perhaps staying small to avoid pain meant missing everything that made life worth the hurt. She thought about Amara and Zara, those fierce little girls who'd seen something in her worth defending. About Mrs. Opal, who'd employed her when no one else would and protected her until protection meant letting go. About Darius, who'd looked at her sketches and seen talent instead of threat, who'd offered collaboration instead of competition. Maybe courage isn't the absence of fear. Maybe it's deciding that what you might gain matters more than what you might lose. The morning of the library opening dawned clear and bright, October sun turning Portland's autumn leaves into fire. Serena dressed carefully in a simple navy dress that brought out the darkness of her hair, let it fall loose around her shoulders instead of hiding behind the usual ponytail. She applied makeup with hands that only shook a little, put on heels she hadn't worn since Seattle, and stared at herself in the mirror like she was meeting a stranger. The Riverside Library stood magnificent in morning light, no longer a skeleton but a fully realized vision. Glass walls reflected the river, making the structure seem to float above the water. Clean lines of steel and stone created strength without heaviness, shelter without confinement. Serena approached slowly, taking in details she'd only glimpsed that night 5 weeks ago. This was architecture that served rather than dominated, that invited rather than impressed. She slipped into the back of the gathered crowd, easily 200 people arranged in rows of folding chairs on the library's front plaza. She spotted the twins immediately in matching yellow dresses, their auburn hair woven into elaborate braids threaded with gold ribbon. They sat in the front row next to an older black woman who had to be their grandmother, and next to her, Darius. He wore a charcoal suit that fit perfectly, white shirt open at the collar, and even from this distance Serena could see the tension in his shoulders. He scanned the crowd periodically, searching, and she knew he was looking for her. The knowledge sent warmth through her chest. The mayor spoke first, praising the vision behind the library and its potential to serve underserved neighborhoods. Then the library board chair introduced Darius as the architect who'd built not just a library but a heart for the community, who donated countless hours beyond his contract to ensure every detail served people's actual needs. Darius stepped to the microphone. "Thank you all for being here." His voice carried across the plaza, steady but with an undercurrent of emotion. "This building has been more than a project for me. It's been a journey back to understanding what architecture is supposed to serve. Not egos or awards, but human needs, human healing." He paused and the crowd grew quieter, sensing vulnerability they hadn't expected from this successful CEO. "2 years ago, I lost my wife, Isabella. She was a brilliant architect who always said that libraries were special because they held stories of how people overcome the impossible. Stories of transformation and second chances." A hush fell complete now. No one had ever heard Darius Caldwell speak publicly about his loss. After she died, I focused on building things that couldn't feel pain. Structures and walls and foundations. I thought that was strength. Thought that maintaining what already existed was enough. I thought grief demanded isolation. His gaze swept the crowd and found Serena in the back. Relief washed over his features. "I was wrong. We all build foundations in life, some of steel, some of concrete, some of habit and fear. But I learned recently that the strongest ones are built of courage and kindness and the willingness to risk being hurt again. There's someone here who taught me that," he continued, eyes still on Serena. "Someone who showed me that when foundations crack, they can be repaired and sometimes made stronger than before. Someone whose vision shaped this building in ways most of you won't see, but everyone will feel. Serena Brooks, would you please come up here?" A collective murmur rippled through the crowd. Serena stood frozen, unable to move, barely able to breathe. Until Mrs. Opal appeared beside her somehow, materializing like she always did when needed most, and gave her a gentle push. "Go on, child," the older woman whispered. "Some stories need to be finished properly, out loud, where everyone can witness." Serena made her way to the front on legs that felt disconnected from her body. The crowd parted, faces turning to watch this unknown woman being summoned to the stage. When she reached Darius, his smile filled something in her she hadn't realized was empty. Some cavity she'd been carrying for 2 years. He reached into his pocket and pulled out half of a cookie. One of Mrs. Opal's heart cookies broken cleanly down the middle, the raspberry center visible and dark. "I kept this from that night 5 weeks ago, broke it by accident when I put it in my pocket, but I saved it because it reminded me of something important." He held up the broken cookie half so everyone could see. This library was designed with a cafe, a place where nourishment for the body meets nourishment for the mind. "I am pleased to announce that Rosewood Cafe, under the direction of Mrs. Opal June and Serena Brooks, will be operating that space." Applause broke out, but Darius wasn't finished. "But more than that, this broken cookie reminded me that healing isn't about forgetting who broke you or pretending the cracks don't exist. It's about building again, brick by brick, with someone who understands your fractures because they carry their own. Someone who sees beauty in broken things and has the courage to create despite every reason to hide." From the side of the plaza, partially hidden behind a support column, Vanessa Sterling stood watching. She'd driven down from Seattle against explicit orders, unable to stay away from what should have been her moment standing beside Darius. Her face struggled between a strained smile for any cameras that might catch her and barely suppressed fury at watching everything she'd planned for 20 months slip away. She turned and left before the ceremony concluded, heels clicking sharp staccato against concrete, a retreat that looked like dignity but felt like defeat. As the official program ended and the crowd moved inside for tours, Amara and Zara bounded up to Serena with the enthusiasm of puppies. "Did our plan work?" Amara asked, bouncing slightly. "Are you going to work in Daddy's building now? Are you going to be our friend forever?" Zara added, slipping her small hand into Serena's with the trust that children extend before the world teaches them caution. Darius laughed, and the sound was rusty but genuine. Girls, give Miss Serena some space. She hasn't even agreed to manage the cafe yet. Actually, Serena heard herself say, surprised by her own certainty. I think I'm interested in both positions. Cafe manager and maybe, if the offer's still open, design consultant. For now. The hope that bloomed in Darius's eyes matched the feeling unfurling in her chest. Fragile still, tentative, but real. For now sounds perfect. We can build from there, see what kind of foundation we can create together. Everyone ends up with cracks, but if we dare to trust one more time, love can fill even the deepest voids and create something stronger than what existed before. 3 days after the library opening, Darius sat in a war room of his own making. The Caldwell architecture conference table was covered with documents a private investigator had delivered that morning in a sealed envelope. His hands trembled slightly as he read through evidence that confirmed what his gut had been screaming for weeks. Marcus Chen, the investigator, a former FBI analyst who'd gone private after 20 years in white-collar crime, had been thorough. Bank records showed a wire transfer of $30,000 from Sterling Consulting Group to Dylan Foster's business account, dated exactly 2 weeks before the forum post appeared. Email exchanges recovered from a backup server Dylan's IT department hadn't properly scrubbed showed conversations about neutralizing the Serena Brooks problem before she gained traction in Portland's architecture community. But the discovery that made Darius's blood run cold sat in a manila folder marked confidential. Geological survey reports from the Maple Heights project, the construction site where Isabella had died. The reports showed structural concerns flagged by the initial site assessment, warnings about inadequate shoring for the excavation depth, recommendations for additional safety measures that would have added 3 weeks and $80,000 to the timeline. Vanessa's signature appeared on the approval to proceed without those measures. Her handwriting scrawled across the bottom. Timeline critical. Proceed as planned. VCS. The date stamp showed she'd signed off 2 days before sending Isabella to that site inspection. 2 days before the shoring collapsed and buried his wife under 3 tons of concrete and rebar. Darius closed the folder, vision blurring. For 20 months he'd believed Isabella's death was a tragic accident, an unpredictable failure of equipment, an act of God that no one could have prevented. Now he knew it was negligence at minimum, possibly something darker. Vanessa had chosen timeline and budget over safety, and when the predictable happened, she'd positioned herself as the grieving colleague, the supportive business partner, the woman who could help him through his loss, all while knowing she'd caused it. His office phone buzzed. His assistant's voice came through the speaker, tentative. Mr. Caldwell, the district attorney's office is on line 2. They said it's regarding your meeting request about the Maple Heights incident. Put them through. His voice came out steadier than he felt. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. The DA's investigative unit would review the evidence, cross-reference it with OSHA reports from the accident, and determine if criminal charges were warranted. Obstruction of justice, criminally negligent homicide, maybe manslaughter if they could prove Vanessa understood the likely consequences. When he hung up, Darius sat in silence watching the river flow past his windows. The Willamette moved constantly, never the same water twice, carrying everything downstream whether it wanted to go or not. He thought about calling Serena, then stopped himself. She deserved better than being dragged into this darkness, better than becoming collateral damage in his quest for justice. His phone rang again. Mrs. Opal's name appeared on the screen. Mr. Caldwell, that girl hasn't returned my calls in 3 days. Her voice carried concern that transcended employer worry. I went by her apartment this morning and she didn't answer, but her neighbor said she saw her leaving with suitcases yesterday. Darius's chest constricted. Where would she go? I don't know, but I know why she's running. Someone sent her copies of that forum post along with articles from Seattle about the plagiarism accusations, detailed ones with photos and quotes from Dylan Foster. Her past delivered in a package to remind her why she should stay hidden. He closed his eyes. Vanessa. Even from Seattle, even suspended, she was still fighting. "There's something else you should know," Mrs. Opal continued. "The Oregon Architecture Review Board contacted me asking for Serena's current information. They're opening a formal review of the allegations against her at Dylan Foster's original complaint. Someone filed a petition to revisit the case." Who filed it, though Darius already knew. The petition came from a concerned citizen, but it included supporting documentation from Sterling Consulting Group about conflicts of interest and questions of professional ethics. Vanessa was trying to destroy Serena's chance at redemption before it could even begin, ensuring that even if Darius cleared her name, the stain would remain permanent. "I need to find her," Darius heard himself say. "Mrs. Opal, I need your help." The older woman was quiet for a moment. "I can't give you her address, privacy laws, but I can tell you that girl has a cousin in Astoria who owns a bookstore on Commercial Street, place called Chapter and Verse. If I were running from Portland, that's where I'd feel safe." Darius was already grabbing his jacket. "Thank you. Mr. Caldwell?" Mrs. Opal's voice stopped him. "That girl's been hurt by men who made her believe she wasn't enough. If you're going after her, you better be damn sure you're ready to prove different. Not with words, but with action. Not with promises, but with sacrifice." "I understand." He meant it with every cell in his body. The drive to Astoria took 90 minutes through late October rain, the kind of persistent northwest drizzle that turned everything gray and made the coast highway treacherous. Darius called his mother to take the twins for the night, then focused on the road and what he'd say when he found Serena. Astoria rose from the Columbia River like a town suspended between water and sky. Victorian houses clinging to hillsides, the Astoria Megler Bridge stretching toward Washington like a promise of escape. He found Chapter and Verse easily, a narrow storefront wedged between a coffee shop and an antique store, its windows displaying hardcovers and hand-lettered signs about upcoming readings. Inside smelled of old paper and possibilities. A woman in her 40s with Serena's eyes and a kind smile looked up from behind the register. "Can I help you find something?" she asked. Then her expression shifted to recognition. "You're Darius Caldwell. I've seen your photo. I'm looking for Serena. Is she here?" The woman, who had to be the cousin, studied him with the wariness of someone who'd helped pick up pieces before. "She came yesterday, pretty upset, said she needed somewhere quiet to think. I need to talk to her, it's important. She said the same thing about not being found." The cousin crossed her arms, said she was done with architects and their promises and their ability to make her believe in things that weren't real. "I'm not here to make promises." Darius met her eyes directly. "I'm here to offer proof, evidence that can clear her name and destroy the man who tried to destroy her, but she needs to be willing to fight, and I can't make her do that. I can only show her she doesn't have to fight alone." The cousin studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "She's at the Cannery Pier Hotel, room 312. But if you hurt her worse than she's already hurt, there won't be anywhere you can hide that I won't find you. Family protects family." "Understood." Darius turned to leave, then paused. "Thank you for being someone she could run to. Everyone needs that." The hotel sat at the end of a pier jutting into the Columbia, rooms literally suspended over water. Darius found 312 and knocked, hearing movement inside followed by a long silence. "Serena, it's Darius. I know you don't want to see anyone, but I have something you need to hear, please." More silence, then footsteps. The door opened a crack, chain still engaged, and Serena's face appeared. She looked exhausted, eyes red from crying, hair pulled back in a messy knot. "How did you find me?" Her voice was flat, emotionless. Mrs. Opal cares about you enough to break her own rules. Can I come in? 5 minutes. If you want me to leave after that, I'll go. She hesitated, then unhooked the chain. The room was small but comfortable, floor-to-ceiling windows showing the river sliding past beneath them. Her sketchbooks lay open on the bed, pages filled with new designs. A suitcase sat half unpacked in the corner. Darius set his briefcase on the small table. I hired an investigator. He found proof that Dylan Foster plagiarized your work, not the other way around. Digital forensics, time-stamped files, email evidence, testimony from 2 former employees who are willing to swear under oath about what they witnessed. He pulled out folders, spreading documentation across the table. And I have proof that Vanessa Sterling paid him $30,000 to sabotage you again, to make sure you stayed buried so you couldn't interfere with her plans. Serena stared at the documents but didn't touch them. Why does any of this matter? Even if you prove Dylan lied, my reputation is still ruined. No one will hire me. The Architecture Review Board is reopening my case. I'll just be fighting the same battle over and over. That's why I submitted all of this to the board yesterday. Darius kept his voice level. They're convening an emergency session next week to review the evidence. Public hearing. Your chance to face Dylan and have the truth on record. Serena shook her head, backing away. I can't do that. I can't stand in front of people again and be judged and picked apart. You don't understand what it was like the first time. You're right, I don't. Darius's voice gentled. But I understand what it's like to live in fear of your own potential. To play small because big means being visible and visible means being vulnerable. I've done that for 20 months, Serena. Built nothing new, risked nothing that mattered, kept myself locked down tight so I wouldn't have to feel anything. He took a breath. And then 2 little girls dragged you into my life and you showed me that broken foundations can be rebuilt. That cracks don't mean condemned. You gave me that gift without even trying, just by being brave enough to show up with a basket of food and an opinion about my blueprints. Now I'm asking you to show up one more time. Not for me, for yourself, because you deserve to stand in front of those people and watch them admit they were wrong. I'm not strong enough. Serena's voice broke. I'm not who you think I am, Darius. I'm just a baker who got lucky with a few sketches. Dylan was right. I'm not enough for this world. Dylan was a mediocre architect with a wealthy father and good hair who felt threatened by someone with actual vision. Darius pulled out one more folder, this one containing her sketches from the cafe design. I incorporated every single one of your suggestions into the library. Not because I was being kind, but because they were better than anything my team or I had come up with. The space works now. It heals. That's your gift. He moved closer, not touching, but present. You're not just enough, Serena. You're exceptional. And the only person who doesn't see that is you. She turned away, arms wrapped around herself. Even if I wanted to fight, I can't face them alone. Last time I had no one. Dylan had his father's firm, their lawyers, all those people who believed his version. I had a public defender from student services who told me to accept the withdrawal and move on. This time you have me. Darius's voice carried absolute certainty. And Mrs. Opal, and Amara and Zara who've been crying every night asking where Miss Rena went, and a private attorney I've already retained who specializes in professional ethics cases. You won't be alone unless you choose to be. Serena was quiet for a long time, staring out at the river. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. What if I do this and lose anyway? What if the truth doesn't matter and they believe him again? Then we'll know you fought. Darius stepped beside her, both of them watching water flow beneath the window. And fighting matters more than winning sometimes. It's the difference between accepting what someone else decided you deserve and demanding what you actually earned. She turned to look at him, really look. and he saw the war in her eyes. Terror battling hope, safety battling possibility. "Your daughters," she whispered. "If I do this and it goes badly, it'll reflect on you." On Caldwell Architecture, Vanessa will make sure of that. Vanessa is facing criminal investigation for her role in Isabella's death. Darius delivered this quietly. The geological reports she approved, the safety measures she cut, they all led directly to that collapse. She knew the risks and chose profit over safety. The DA is reviewing evidence for criminal charges. Serena's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh God, Darius. I tell you this because you need to understand that Vanessa has already done her worst. There's nothing left for me to fear from her. But you still have the chance to reclaim something she and Dylan tried to take. Your voice, your truth, your place in the profession you love." He turned to face her fully. "I'm not asking you to do this for me or for my daughters or for some abstract principle. I'm asking you to do it for the woman who spent 6 nights in Astoria filling sketchbooks with buildings she'll never design unless she decides she's worth fighting for." Serena looked at those sketchbooks on the bed, pages covered with her vision, then back at Darius. "If I do this," her voice strengthened slightly, "if I walk into that hearing, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't protect me." Her eyes held his. "Don't try to save me or speak for me or make this easier. I need to do it myself or it won't mean anything. You can be there, but I have to be the one who stands up." Darius felt something shift in his chest, pieces realigning. "Deal. But I get to drive you there and be in that room and look at you like I believe every word you say. Because I do." She almost smiled. "That I can live with." The emergency session of the Oregon Architecture Review Board convened the following Tuesday in downtown Portland's Civic Center. A brutalist structure from the 70s that had aged into accidental dignity. The hearing room could hold 300 people and was nearly full by 9:30 when proceedings began. Architects from across the state, journalists covering professional ethics scandals, students from Portland State's architecture program, and dozens of curious citizens drawn by social media coverage of the case. Serena sat at the respondents' table in a charcoal suit she'd borrowed from her cousin, hair pulled back in a severe bun, hands clasped to stop their trembling. Beside her sat Margaret Rivera, the attorney Darius had retained, a 60-year-old woman with steel-gray hair and a reputation for destroying liars on cross-examination. Across the aisle, Dylan Foster looked every inch the successful architect in a Tom Ford suit that probably cost $5,000. His legal team consisted of 3 attorneys from Foster and Associates' corporate firm, arranged around him like shields. He caught Serena's eye once and smirked, the same condescending expression he'd worn when he told her to find her own level. Darius sat in the gallery's 3rd row with Mrs. Opal on one side and his mother on the other. Amara and Zara were at school, spared this particular battle, but they'd made Serena promise to tell them everything afterward. In the front row, Serena spotted several members of Portland's architecture community she recognized from industry events. Some faces showed curiosity, others skepticism, a few what looked like sympathy. The board chair, a distinguished black woman in her 70s named Dr. Patricia Hammond, called the session to order. "We're here to review allegations of academic and professional misconduct originally filed against Serena Brooks in 2022 by Dylan Foster. New evidence has emerged that calls the original findings into question. This hearing will determine whether those findings should be vacated and Ms. Brooks's record cleared." She looked directly at Serena. "Ms. Brooks, you have the right to present evidence and testimony. You may make an opening statement if you wish." Serena stood, legs shaking but holding. Her voice came out quiet but clear. 3 years ago, I designed a community wellness center for my senior thesis project. I worked on it for 8 months, developing every detail, solving problems no one had addressed before about how to integrate mental health services with physical spaces in ways that reduced stigma and promoted healing. She pulled out a USB drive. These are my original files, complete with metadata showing creation dates. You'll see the first sketches appeared in January 2021, detailed drawings in March, final presentation in July. Margaret Rivera connected the drive to the presentation system, and images filled the screen behind Serena. Dylan Foster shifted in his seat. 2 months after I presented this design to my thesis committee, Serena continued, Dylan Foster submitted nearly identical work to the National Young Architect Competition. He won first place and a $250,000 commission. When I confronted him privately, he told me no one would believe a scholarship student over a Foster. He was right. Dylan's lead attorney stood. Objection. Ms. Brooks is testifying to conversations without corroboration and making accusations without evidence. Dr. Hammond looked at Margaret Rivera. Counselor, we have corroboration. Margaret stood holding a document. These are sworn affidavits from 2 former Foster and Associates employees who witnessed the theft and were subsequently fired when they questioned it. She handed copies to the board. Additionally, we have email evidence recovered through digital forensics showing Mr. Foster's awareness of Miss Brooks's work and his deliberate acquisition of her files. The room erupted in murmurs. Dylan's face flushed dark red. Dr. Hammond gavelled for order. The presentation continued for 40 minutes. Margaret walked the board through time-stamped files, email chains, witness statements, and expert analysis showing that Dylan's award-winning design was 87% identical to Serena's original work. The evidence was overwhelming, methodical, devastating. When it was Dylan's turn to respond, his attorneys tried procedural objections, questions about chain of custody, attacks on witness credibility, but the digital evidence was unassailable. File metadata doesn't lie. Email servers keep perfect records. The truth had been sitting in various databases for 3 years, waiting for someone to look. Mr. Foster. Dr. Hammond's voice cut through the legal maneuvering. Did you or did you not have access to Ms. Brooks's thesis files? Dylan's jaw worked. I may have seen similar concepts. Architecture is iterative. Ideas evolve from collective consciousness. That's not what I asked. Dr. Hammond leaned forward. Did you access her files? Yes or no? His lead attorney whispered urgently in his ear, but Dylan shook him off. He stood and Serena saw something ugly flash across his features. Fine. Yes, I saw her work. She showed it to me herself, asking for feedback like she always did, looking for validation because she was so damn insecure about everything. Her ideas had potential but were poorly executed. I refined them, made them professional, made them work. The room went dead silent. Even his own attorneys looked shocked. So you're admitting you took her work? Dr. Hammond's voice was ice. Claimed it as your own, won awards and commissions based on it, and when she objected, you destroyed her reputation to cover your theft. I improved substandard work. Dylan's voice rose. She should be thanking me for making her half-formed concepts into something people actually wanted to build. Serena felt rage flash through her, white-hot and clarifying. She stood without planning to, Margaret's hand on her arm coming too late to stop her. You didn't improve anything. Her voice rang across the chamber. You took the heart out of it. That design was meant to heal people, to create spaces where vulnerability felt safe instead of shameful. You stripped out everything that mattered and left a pretty shell that serves egos instead of humans. She pulled out her sketchbook, the original one from 3 years ago, and held it up. This is mine. Every line, every calculation, every choice about light and circulation, and how people move through space when they're hurting. You stole the forms, but you never understood the purpose, and that's why everything you build is technically perfect and emotionally dead. The gallery erupted in applause. Dr. Hammond gavelled for order but didn't look displeased. Dylan lunged forward, his careful composure shattered. "You're nobody. You were a scholarship student who could barely afford materials. I gave you relevance. Without me, you'd still be designing cookie houses in your apartment. And without stealing from people more talented than you," Serena shot back, "you'd still be riding your father's reputation and producing mediocre work that checks boxes without changing anything. The difference between us is I create because I have to, because I see problems and need to solve them. You create because you want applause." The truth of it hung in the air like a bell tone, clear and undeniable. Dr. Hammond gavelled again. "Mr. Foster, sit down. Miss Brooks, you may also be seated." But Serena wasn't finished. She turned to face the gallery, to face the architects and students and journalists who would carry this story beyond these walls. "For 2 years I believed what he told me, that I wasn't enough, that my work was derivative, that I deserved to have my name erased from my own designs. I let fear make me small because being small felt safer than being visible." She looked directly at Darius, who was watching her with undisguised pride. "But I'm done being small. I'm done letting other people's insecurity determine my worth. I designed that wellness center because I believed architecture could heal, and I still believe it. Whether this board clears my name or not, I know the truth now. I know what I'm capable of. And that's something no one can take from me again." The applause this time was thunderous. Dr. Hammond let it continue for several seconds before restoring order. "The board will deliberate and render a decision within 72 hours. She looked at Dylan with pure contempt. "Mr. Foster, I suggest you speak with your attorneys about potential consequences. Plagiarism, fraud, and witness intimidation carry both civil and criminal implications." She turned to Serena, and her expression softened. "Ms. Brooks, this board owes you an apology for not investigating more thoroughly when these allegations first arose. Preliminary ruling is that your record will be cleared pending final vote, and we will be recommending sanctions against Mr. Foster, including license suspension and mandatory restitution." The session adjourned. Serena stood on shaking legs as Margaret hugged her, whispering fierce congratulations. Mrs. Opal appeared from nowhere with tears streaming down her face. Darius hung back, letting others congratulate her first, but his eyes never left her face. When the crowd finally thinned, he approached. "You were magnificent, absolutely magnificent. I couldn't have done it without you." Serena's voice trembled with exhaustion and exhilaration. "Without knowing someone believed in me enough to fight." "You did the fighting," Darius corrected gently. "I just held the door open. You walked through it." Behind them, Dylan was in heated conversation with his attorneys. His career crumbling in real time. Several journalists approached him with questions he refused to answer. The young architect who'd been golden and untouchable was now publicly exposed as a fraud, and everyone in the industry would know by sunset. Serena watched him for a moment, then turned away. He doesn't matter anymore. The realization came with relief. He's just a person who made himself feel big by making others feel small, and that's the saddest thing I can imagine. "Come on," Darius offered his arm. "Amara and Zara made me promise to bring you to dinner tonight. They've been practicing a song they wrote about brave ladies who fight dragons. Fair warning, it's enthusiastic but not particularly tuneful." Serena laughed, the sound surprised and genuine. "That sounds perfect." 2 weeks later, the Architecture Review Board's final ruling came through. Dylan Foster's license was suspended for 7 years with mandatory restitution to Serena of $250,000 plus damages. The plagiarism finding was officially overturned. Serena's record cleared completely, and she was granted full architectural licensure based on her portfolio and demonstrated expertise. The National Young Architect Competition stripped Dylan's award and offered it to Serena instead, along with the commission to actually build the wellness center she'd originally designed. A location had been identified in East Portland, funding secured through a combination of city grants and private investment led by Caldwell Architecture. Serena stood in the library cafe, now officially called Healing Stories, watching workers install the final touches. The space had transformed exactly as she'd envisioned, flowing naturally from the reading areas, columns creating visual connection without barriers, light spilling through carefully positioned windows to guide movement and create pockets of both community and solitude. You know, Darius appeared beside her carrying 2 cups of Mrs. Opal's famous hot chocolate. I've been thinking about what you said at the hearing, about creating because you have to, because you see problems that need solving. Serena accepted the cup, warmth spreading through her fingers. What about it? I want to offer you a partnership, not just consultant status, full partner at Caldwell Architecture. His voice was serious. We'd rename it Caldwell and Brooks, equal ownership, equal decision-making. You bring vision that serves humanity. I bring structural expertise and business operations. Together we build things that matter instead of things that impress. She stared at him. That's an enormous offer. It's an overdue one. Darius met her eyes. I've spent 20 months maintaining what Isabella and I built, afraid that creating something new meant replacing her. But that's not how it works. Love doesn't divide. It multiplies. Memory doesn't demand stagnation. It inspires evolution. He set down his cup and took both her hands. She taught me to build with heart. You reminded me what that actually means. A partnership honors both of them, the woman I loved before and the woman I'm learning to love now. Serena's breath caught. You love me? I'm falling in love with you, Darius corrected. Past tense suggests completion. Present progressive feels more accurate. It's happening. Actively, every time I watch you solve problems or stand up for yourself or make my daughters laugh. Every time you choose courage over safety. I'm falling too, she admitted. But I'm terrified of getting hurt again, of not being enough again, of this being another beautiful thing that crumbles. All foundations crack eventually. Darius's voice was gentle. The question isn't whether they will, but whether we're brave enough to repair them when they do. Whether we choose to rebuild or abandon ship. He pulled a small box from his pocket and Serena's eyes widened. This isn't what you think. He opened it to reveal not a ring, but a key. This is to the penthouse unit in the building next to the library. 3 bedrooms, river views, enough space for sketchbooks and daughters and maybe eventually a family that's bigger than the sum of its parts. I'm not asking you to move in tomorrow or make promises you're not ready for. I'm asking if you want to imagine a future where broken things become beautiful things. Where 2 people with cracks help each other stay standing. Serena looked at the key, then at Darius, then through the cafe windows at Amara and Zara, who were playing in the library's children's section, building towers from blocks and laughing when they fell. I want to try. She whispered. I want to build something new with someone who sees cracks as places where light gets in, instead of structural failures waiting to collapse. Darius smiled, and it transformed his whole face. Then let's start with dinner. The girls have been planning a menu all week. Lots of cookies. From across the cafe, Mrs. Opal watched them through the serving window, her own smile knowing and satisfied. She'd seen this coming the night 2 scared little girls dragged a shy baker into her life. Sometimes the universe sent exactly what people needed in the most unexpected packages. 9 months later, on a July evening when Portland's heat finally broke into summer thunder, Serena and Darius stood before the completed wellness center. The building rose from a previously empty lot in East Portland, its lines clean but welcoming, structure serving purpose rather than ego. The dedication plaque read, Isabella Memorial Wellness Center, designed by Serena Brooks Caldwell and Brooks Architecture. In memory of Dr. Isabella Caldwell, who believed architecture should heal. In celebration of second chances and foundations rebuilt stronger. Amara and Zara wore matching blue dresses, their cornrows woven with silver thread. They'd insisted on cutting the ribbon themselves, practicing their scissor technique for days. "Mommy would love this," Zara whispered to Serena, slipping her small hand into hers. "She always said buildings should hug people instead of showing off." Serena squeezed back, emotion thick in her throat. "Then we built her something she'd be proud of." The ceremony included remarks from the mayor, from mental health advocates who'd consulted on the design, from community members who'd watched the building rise and recognized it as something different. Something built for them instead of despite them. When Serena spoke, her voice carried across the crowd without trembling. "3 years ago, I designed this building believing that spaces could heal if we built them with empathy instead of ego. Then I lost the chance to see it realized because someone decided my vision wasn't worth defending." She looked at Darius, at their daughters, at Mrs. Opal in the front row beaming with pride. "Today this building opens because people decided I was worth fighting for, worth believing in, worth standing beside when things got hard." Darius Caldwell, Mrs. Opal June, Margaret Rivera, every person who showed up at that hearing or sent messages of support or simply refused to let me disappear. Her voice strengthened. "But mostly this building opens because I decided I was worth fighting for. Because I chose to rebuild my foundation instead of accepting demolition. Because being brave isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite terror, one step at a time until you realize you've traveled further than you ever imagined possible." The applause washed over her like absolution. When Amara and Zara cut the ribbon, the crowd surged forward to tour the space. Serena watched them move through her design, seeing it work exactly as she'd intended. Circulation that felt intuitive, light that comforted, spaces that welcomed vulnerability while protecting privacy. Darius wrapped his arm around her waist. "You built something unbreakable, not the structure, the life." Serena leaned into him, watching thunderclouds gather over Mount Hood. "We built it together, all of us, from broken pieces." That night, after the ceremony ended and the crowds dispersed, the four of them sat on the apartment balcony watching lightning fork across the sky. Amara and Zara had finally fallen asleep on the couch inside, exhausted from excitement. Darius and Serena remained outside, listening to rain begin its percussion against glass and steel. "I have something for you." Serena pulled out a small wrapped package. "I've been waiting for the right moment." Inside was a photograph in a simple frame. It showed Isabella at a drafting table, younger than Serena had ever seen her, pencil tucked behind her ear, laughing at something off camera. Beneath the photo, Serena had mounted a quote in careful calligraphy. "The foundation of love is trust. Never stop building. Dr. Isabella Caldwell." "Where did you find this?" Darius's voice was thick. "Your mother gave it to me last month. She thought you might be ready to display it somewhere other than that corner of your office where you hide things that hurt too much to see." Serena took his hand. "Isabella was extraordinary. She built beautiful things and raised beautiful daughters and loved you in ways that shaped who you are. I'm not trying to replace her or compete with her memory. I'm trying to honor it by helping you build something new that includes her legacy." Darius pulled her close, and they sat in silence watching rain clean the city, washing dust and heat and old sorrows down toward the river and eventually the sea. Sometimes we believe broken means useless. Sometimes we think cracks are endings rather than places where new growth begins. But if you're brave enough to rebuild, to risk your heart one more time despite every reason to stay safely shattered, you discover that the strongest foundations are the ones that survived breaking. The most beautiful structures are the ones that bear witness to their own repair. In the morning, they would wake to sunshine. The twins would demand pancakes shaped like architectural drawings. Mrs. Opal would call with gossip from the cafe. The wellness center would open its doors to people who needed healing. Serena would start sketching her next project. This one, a school designed around the principle that children deserve spaces that celebrate curiosity instead of demanding conformity. But for now, they sat in the thunder and the rain, two people who'd survived being broken, learning together how to build something that could weather any storm.